All right, so I want to welcome you back, Bob Avakian, to the third RNL show. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm really excited about it.
Okay, well, in this third show, we're going to get more into the future society, what we're aiming for, what this revolution is going to bring into being.
So we wanted to start right out with asking you, you have made the bold statement that it is right to want state power, that state power in the hands of the right people and the right class is a great thing. And to wildly understate it, this is not how most people think about state power. Why is state power a great thing?
Well, you have to begin with what you referred to, in the hands of the right class of people, the right kind of state power based on the right kind of system. One reason why a lot of people may not think state power is so great is because they're living under the exercise of it by these monstrous oppressors. So the idea, the idea is promoted, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and all this bullshit from some British lord, So, people are, inclined to look at the way things are now and how power is exercised and have a hard time imagining it could be exercised in a different way by different people. And so the reason I say state power is a great thing is because in order to do all the things that we need to do to uproot all this oppression, you have to have power in society in order to do them. I mean, the reason we can't do them now is because the wrong people, that is a class of exploiters, the capitalist imperialists, have state power and use that state power to suppress any attempt at seriously uprooting all this oppression. So we need a different kind of state power, a socialist state power that, first of all, is radically different in terms of what it's based on, what it's aiming for, and also whom it involves in the exercise of state power. It's involving the masses of people increasingly in playing an initiating role and a conscious role in transforming society. And unlike the present system, socialist state power backs up the masses of people in moving to uproot all this oppression, while it also provides leadership to them to see what they're up against, what are the contradictions they have to break through on in order to uproot all this, and how to wage that struggle. So it's a completely different kind of state power. Any idea, just think about it. Any idea that you were going to overthrow the existing system and then you're not going to have any state power, guess what happens? You are going to have state power. It's going to be the state power you just overthrew will be back in power in a quick minute. So the whole idea that you can do without a state, without state power, yes, you need a radically different kind of state power, but you need power to be able to lead masses of people and back them up in making all these transformations. What happens now when people go out? First of all, the state power, I'll just back up a second, will be radically different. You're not going to have a police force that murders people on a daily basis in order to maintain a system of oppression. The police forces, we will need police forces, we will need armed forces to defend the revolution. But these forces will be radically different. They will be the masses of people who have risen up to make the revolution in the first place. That's from whom the police and the armed forces will be drawn. And I've made the statement before. Some people say, "Whoa, wait a minute! You're going to take all these people out here running around right now, shooting each other and selling drugs, and you're going to give them state power?" I don't think so. I don't think I want to be part of that. No, we're not talking about people as they are now. We're talking about people. Go back to the question that Andy raised in a previous talk. Previous interview we were doing, people as they've been radically transformed, as they've radically transformed themselves on the basis of being struggled with in the course of transforming the world and making revolution. So then, the state power is going to be in the hands of masses of people who've been struggled with to be emancipators of humanity and to make a revolution on that basis. And, there's a lot of experience in the history of revolution, and particularly communist revolution, that we can draw from, that it is possible to transform people. Like when they made the revolution in China, for example, which took a different path, just to be clear, for anybody out there, just to be clear, was a revolution that in those particular circumstances was made by waging armed struggle from the very, very beginning. Armed struggle from the beginning and throughout. That was the character of the Chinese Revolution because of the particular character of Chinese society and the conditions that they were dealing with. Our revolution is different. It's a period of carrying out the three prepares through political and ideological work and, yes, standing up and defending the people and fighting the power, but not attempting to wage an armed struggle until the conditions for that have been brought into being. That's where the three prepares come in. That's what we're working toward, but that's not what we're doing now. But there's still something to learn from the Chinese Revolution. You know, when Mao started up the People's War in China, the armed struggle against the existing oppressive government and the imperialists who were behind it, the U.S. and Britain in particular, he said, I went to the brave elements, what we might call the brothers and sisters on the street, you know, in our circumstances. He said, I went to them because they weren't afraid to die. But then a tremendous amount of struggle had to be waged. What's this about? What's this armed struggle for? This is not armed struggle to go out and rip off people. You know, they had to have points of attention, you know, to make sure that the people were adhering to the principles of the revolution and applying the principles of the revolution. You know, things like you don't take a needle or a thread from the masses of people. You don't go about, you know, this was mainly a male army at that time, although the masses of women did become involved. You don't go abusing women. You know, there are different principles here that have to do with the revolution that we're carrying out. And there was struggle, and they, you know, that's why they had to have those points of discipline and points of attention. So we're talking about masses of people who've been transformed through struggle and transforming themselves in order to bring about the revolution we're talking about and bring into being the necessary state power. But that state power, once established, will be completely different, radically different. The role of state power and whether it really serves the revolution to emancipate the masses of people or whether it actually constitutes another oppressive force over the masses of people is determined by the content of that state power, by the line, the politics and ideology and program that it's based on and that is leading it. That's how you know, and that's how the masses of people can be led to evaluate what's the character of this state power. Is this state power that's standing above the mass of people and turning into an oppressive force that's going to actually restore the old system of exploitation and oppression? Or is this a state power by its content, by its actions, by the way it's being led, by what it's fighting for, by what's guiding it, is actually backing up and supporting the masses of people in emancipating themselves and supporting the revolution throughout the world toward the same goal of emancipation, uprooting and eliminating all antagonistic conflicts among people, all forms of oppression and exploitation. But that's why state power, I mean, yes, I want us to have state power, not the three of us sitting here, but the masses of people who've risen up to make a revolution so that they can carry through what they fought for in that revolution. And yes, so that they can actually back up the masses of people in carrying out those transformations and prevent anyone from actually overthrowing the system that exists and re-enslaving the masses of people. So, you know, this is why state power, socialist state power, is a great thing to have. And it's something we should, you know, everyone who wants to see a more just world should be hungering for this state power, not, you know, worrying about what it'll be like. Yeah, there needs to be a struggle over what it's going to be like, you know, and that will be an ongoing struggle. But we should be primarily hungering for that state power because that's the power that will enable these transformations I'm talking about. Now, to be clear, since I said it will prevent people from overthrowing the socialist system, that doesn't mean that there won't be allowance for dissent. Doesn't mean that we don't need a lot of intellectual and cultural ferment. We do. That's all embodied in the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America. You know, anyone who raises objections to what the government is doing or what the policies are, or even to the very existence of a socialist state, will be allowed to do so. And there will even be ways that criticism is encouraged and fostered and dissent because you need that. You need to know what your shortcomings are. And the masses of people need to thrash out what's right and wrong, what will really lead to on the road of emancipation, and what, you know, even though it might say it's doing that, is actually leading back to the old way. So, you know, there'll be a flourishing and even a promotion of dissent. By that I mean even in the, in the arts and the media and so on, provision made for people to have a vehicle to criticize and raise dissent, even while, people who try to violently overthrow the new socialist system will be prevented from doing so. Oh, well, you're just like the people in power now. That's what they say. You can dissent as long as you don't try to seriously challenge them. Well, no, we're not just like them. For one thing, they don't encourage and promote dissent. They limit dissent within a very narrow sphere. But second of all, once again, we're back to what's the nature, what's the character of that state power? And the reason we're not like them is because what the state power is for, what it concretely does, what it supports the masses of people in doing, what philosophy or ideology, what program, what politics, what social relations it's all embodying and promoting, which are the complete and direct opposite of what exists under this system. So no, we're not just like them at all. We're radically different.
Well, I like that vision. And we'll get further into the Constitution as we go along. But I want to come to what is, a controversial part of this. And you've made a couple of very provocative statements that have to do with the nature of this radically different state power. One, you wrote that not all dictatorships are bad. And another time you said democracy, that's just another word for dictatorship. So these are highly controversial and provocative statements, particularly in this brainwashed society as to what the nature of what democracy actually means and what it is. So I thought it'd be important to get into why it is necessary to be straight up about this for humanity to get free.
Well, look, once again, it depends on what the content of the dictatorship is. But let's back up a step. First of all, we have to define what is a dictatorship. A dictatorship is not, Nikita Khrushchev pounding his shoe on the table in the UN and saying, we will bury you. That's not a dictatorship. A dictatorship, imagine just one person trying to dictate to all of society with no institutions to back it up and no underlying relations that that's based on. It would be impossible. Just think about it. A dictatorship is dictatorship by a class. It's a dictatorship based on an underlying system, either a capitalist imperialist system of exploitation, or on the other hand, a radically different dictatorship of the socialist system, which is moving to uproot all exploitation and oppression. So they're qualitatively different. I know when we went out to the law school, I think at UCLA, and we, popularized this article that you're referring to, which made this point about what a dictatorship actually is. It's the rule of a class, not of an individual or a small clique of people. And, it rests on a definite underlying system of social and most fundamentally, economic relations. So we went there and one of these law students said, well, you're redefining the definition of what a dictatorship is. Yes. Because we're bringing forward the scientific explanation of what a dictatorship is and redefining the unscientific notion that a dictatorship is or could be exercised by just one person or a small group of people with no understanding of the underlying system that they're trying to enforce and what relations that system embodies. So that's the first thing you have to understand. What is a dictatorship? So, and the dictatorship of the proletariat, the exploited class, that's another way of saying socialist state power. Let's demystify. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about state power to enforce the transformations, to be the backing, the institutionalized backing for the transformations that the socialist revolution is all about. Uprooting the oppression of women, uprooting all gender oppression, uprooting the exploitation of people, where some people make money by forcing other people to work for them, uprooting, all the relations among different races and nationalities that are oppressive, that embodies the supremacy of one group over another, and so on and so on. This is what the socialist state power, the dictatorship of the proletariat, is all about. Now, is there democracy under this dictatorship? Yes, there's democracy in a way that is unimaginable under the current capitalist imperialist system, which is the rule of exploiters. There's the involvement, the increasing involvement, wave after wave, of broad masses of people in actually determining the direction of society on the basis of leadership, which, leads them to transform the oppressive relations that they rose up against to make revolution in the first place. So yes, you need leadership, but there is active involvement. And yes, as I said, there's a lot of dissent, ferment, in the arts, and culture generally. For example, in the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, it makes the point. It talks about the principle, which is the principle that guides this whole Constitution, and the dictatorship of the proletariat, the social state power that it envisions and speaks to, which is solid core with a lot of elasticity based on the solid core. So in the realm of education, for example, it says that the solid core of the educational system in this new social society will be the application of dialectical materialism, the scientific approach to understanding material reality both in nature and in society. It says that will be the solid core, but there will also be the elasticity in the form of allowance for other and opposing viewpoints to be presented in the context of the educational system, and so throughout society, in the realm of culture, in the realm of the media, and so on. This is how it is envisioned. This is how, what we've come to understand needs to be applied in terms of actually exercising socialist state power, the dictatorship of the proletariat, in a way that increasingly involves the conscious revolutionary activity of the masses of people, and they're thrashing out different ideas and programs and where they'll lead in a living way. So, now to talk about democracy on the other hand, under this system, Mao said, Mao said, sounds religious. But anyway, Mao did say, and he was right. So that's the important point, that democracy is part of the superstructure. What do we mean by that? Well, like you have a house that has a foundation, the walls and the roof are the superstructure over the foundation. So in society, the foundation is the economic system, and the political institutions and processes and the culture are the superstructure that arises on that and then in turn reflects and reinforces it. So the point is that in the superstructure, democracy is part of that superstructure. And what does that mean? It means that the superstructure, again, arises on the basis of and in turn reinforces the underlying foundation, the economic system that is the foundation for the society. So when you have a capitalist economic foundation based on exploitation, the superstructure, in order for the society to function, has to be an expression of and reinforce that underlying system of exploitation. And if it doesn't, then the society will just come completely unraveled and be torn apart. And I've used the example many times, and I think it's a good example, of the right to eat. The laws as well as the politics are part of the superstructure. So let's say you had a law in capitalist society that said people have a right to eat, and let's expand it more broadly. People have a right to all the basic necessities of life. I mean, after all, what can be more fundamental? That you have to, that you can have the basic necessities of life, or that you're denied the basic necessities of life. So let's say you pass a law. Some well-meaning social democrats got in, and they said, let's pass a law that says that everyone has the right to eat. All right, well now that's a right enshrined in law. So hungry masses who don't have the money to pay for, forget about Whole Foods, what is it? Ralph's Market, from the Big Lebowski, right? Anyway, let's say they go into Ralph's Market, and they go up to the cashier and they got all this food, and the cashier says that'll be $173.28. And they say, I'm sorry, I only have $16. Well, then you're going to have to put some food back. No, I don't, because I have a right to eat. It's written into the law. Now imagine what would happen then. The whole economy would very quickly fall apart, because it takes money to produce all this stuff that's sold in the store, The store has to have a building. It has to have maintenance. It has to pay employees, plus all the other people that had to be paid and all the structures that had to exist and the machinery that had to be used to produce the food. And first of all, the farm workers to get it out of the ground and so on, and to plant it. All that is expenses that went into producing all this food. So if people just walk in and say, I have a right enshrined in law, you can't stop me, I'm going to take anything I need out of this store as long as I say it's for my basic needs, you could see how the whole society would come completely unraveled. So, this is one illustration of how the superstructure of politics and laws and so on has to reflect the underlying system. The democracy we have under this system is the democracy of the capitalist system of exploitation. It means that you can exercise rights as long as they stay within the framework of the capitalist system of exploitation. I was just reading that Adam Hochschild, who did the book, on the Congo and Leopold's Ghost, about the horrific plunder and exploitation and murder of masses of people in the Congo under the rule of Belgian imperialism. You might think, little Belgium, they can't do much. They murdered like nearly half the population of the Congo in the 19th and early part of the 20th century. And anyway, Adam Hochschild, who wrote that book, has written a book about World War I. And he brings out how in World War I, once the great Democrat Woodrow Wilson, who was also a vicious racist, by the way, who supported that film, what the hell is that film?
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation, about glorifying the Ku Klux Klan and presenting black people as depraved animals or out to rape white women all over the place. This Woodrow Wilson and his government passed laws that made it illegal to oppose the war once the U.S. entered World War I, and it made it illegal to criticize the government. This is what this ruling class does when it sees its interests. There wasn't even a war on American soil. It was, remember I think this was a World War I song, wasn't it? Over there, spread the word, the Yanks are coming, et cetera, et cetera. That war was fought over there. It wasn't even fought on American soil, and yet in that context, the true dictatorship of the capitalist class became naked. Often they try to disguise it. Well, you can vote. You're the ones who are actually governing because you can choose who governs you. You can choose between exploiters. Isn't that a great thing? You can choose this group of exploiters or that group of exploiters to rule over you. But then when they saw their interests even challenged a little bit when they went into World War I at the end of the war, after letting all these other powers fight it out for several years, then they cracked down. And the raw hand of dictatorship that is, concealed at times with this outer shell of democracy came, punching through the surface. And so democracy under this system is democracy on the basis of the needs of, the interests of, and ultimately the dictates of the capitalist class. And that's why I say, when we're aiming for communism, we want to get beyond any divisions in society of oppressor and oppressed, exploiters and exploited. So then the whole relations among people are not such that you have to have some institutionalized ways to protect one part of society from another, because there are no exploiters and oppressors ruling over others. So that's a whole longer another discussion. But that's why I say, that democracy, has to be examined in its actual content. What is the content of this democracy? What is it serving? Whose interest is it actually promoting? When the people get drawn into voting for one set of exploiters or another and believing that by doing that they're exercising their power, then that serves the interests of the ruling capitalist class, because people are tailing it. They're just a tail on it, and they're doing everything politically on the terms of it, and they're deluded as to where the real power lies. So this is what's important in terms of understanding the role of democracy. This is a capitalist dictatorship. That World War I experience makes it very clear. But you see it all the time. I mean, why did they murder Fred Hampton in his bed? All this FBI that they're celebrating. I see they got a new show now with a black woman playing a new FBI agent, the secret weapon of the FBI. Upholding this fucking FBI, an organization of mass repression and murder. as some sort of positive thing that, what a, positive institution, and what a great thing that a black woman is the secret weapon of the FBI. I mean, how fucking perverse can you get? But this is, why did the FBI murder Fred Hampton? Because J. Edgar Hoover said the Black Panther Party represents the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States. Fred Hampton was a prominent leader of the Black Panther Party who was attracting a lot of people, not just black people, other people as well, Latinos, white people, Native Americans. He was becoming a figure out there who was boldly saying, by the way, that movie they did about him is not the real picture of Fred Hampton, just to be clear. But he was out there saying, I am a revolutionary, and getting crowds of people to say, I am a revolutionary. Well, that's enough democracy right now. You're dead. We're going to go into your apartment in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning or whatever, and we're going to shoot you in your bed, and then shoot you again to make sure you're dead. And then say that it's your fault. Lie about what happened, that, you started this gunfight, and all these heroic FBI agents and Chicago pigs and whatever had to defend themselves, which was proven to be a lie, just like they did in Attica. The prisoners rose up in Attica heroically, uniting across lines, divisions that are very hard to overcome, just like the prisoners in Alabama are doing now. They united Puerto Rican and other Latino, black, Native American, and white prisoners. They took guards hostage, but they were very careful not to harm the guards, because they, for one reason, they knew that then that would make it much easier to go after them. So they were very careful about that. And then what happened? The great, mainstream Republican, sort of liberal Republican, Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor, part of the Rockefeller family of exploiters, sent in the police, the state police, and they went in and they murdered not only dozens of prisoners, but the guards as well, and then tried to claim the prisoners had cut the throat of the guards, which was also disproven. This is the exercise of the actual democracy of this country, which means it's essential dictatorship over people, and whenever they rise up, or whenever, Fred Hampton, I think he first went to jail because he took some ice cream off an ice cream truck and passed it out to the kids in the neighborhood in the middle of summer, and that's how they first got him in jail, and then he was out, on jail, and that's when they murdered him. He wasn't even saying, I'm going to mobilize an army to overthrow this system tomorrow. He was just talking about revolution, and that was recognized as enough of a threat that the facade of democracy, the sham of democracy, fell to the ground, and the naked fist of dictatorship came out and murdered him, just like it did the prisoners in Attica. And you can even go back in the history of this country when people went on strike before the unions were so powerful, and they would murder dozens of people striking, and back in the end of the 19th and into the 20th century. So, this is the actual relations of power in this society. It's a dictatorship over those who are exploited and oppressed. It's the rule of the capitalist class over society. And it's very useful for them most of the time to have elections, because that's a way they can involve people in their own oppression. By making them think that by voting for, you see this, I'm pro-choice and I vote. I'm this and that and I vote. Well, you're just voting for people who are oppressing you. That's the nature of democracy under this system. And your rights will always come right up to the point where in any way they're perceived to threaten the system by the powers that be, and then you'll see the naked murderous hand of the dictatorship come out. And the dictatorship of the proletariat socialist state power is radically different from that in the ways that I've discussed.
You've mentioned, and it's come up a number of times already, the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America that you authored. And we wanted to ask, first of all, it's an amazing document, and there's never been anything like this before, especially at all, but especially before the seizure of power. Why did you feel it was important to write it? And is there anything that you had in mind, any particular problems or questions you had in mind when you were writing it that you would suggest for people who are newly reading it that they also think about as they're reading it, or people returning to it?
Well, I just did it because I didn't have anything else to do. No, I mean, look, there's a need for people to have a clear sense, a concrete sense, as well as a lofty vision of what it is we're aiming for. sometimes the critics say, oh, you're always complaining about what you don't like. You don't like this, you don't like that, you don't like it, but you never can say what you're for. Well, here it is concretized what we're for. I mean, first of all, even before this Constitution was written, we were very clear what we were for in broad strokes and in basic terms. But I felt there was a need, coming off of summing up a lot of experience of previous, socialist society in China and the Soviet Union before it, before, the revolutions there were overturned and capitalism was restored in the Soviet Union in the 1950s and in China in the 1970s. In summing up this, I felt there was a need to make another leap in terms of what's, we're talking about socialist state power. What socialist state power and the socialist society that it was, bringing the basis for and reinforcing, what should that society actually look like and as living a way as possible so that people could get a concrete sense, and also so we'd have a guideline. What do you do after you make a revolution? What do you do on day one, people often raise? Well, this is look, in the actual event of a successful revolution, there'll be a lot of new questions that'll get thrown up. Some things may turn out to be different than the way they're, in some particulars of that Constitution. But it does lay out the basic principles and a lot of very concrete guidelines and institutional, procedures and institutional organizations that could actually guide people on how to begin the day after seizing power, so to speak, and actually transforming society in a way that would be emancipating. So that was, why I recognized the need for that. And I did have certain questions in mind. I did a lot of study of, I've been wrestling with this question for several years, like what should be the character. We can learn from China, we can learn from the Soviet Union, but we can also see certain shortcomings. What should be the character of the actual system, of the actual state power, of the actual institutions, from the political, governmental institutions to the culture, to the educational system, and so on? What should be their actual character? What can we learn from past experience? Where can we see that things need to be done differently and better? So that was a sort of a general concern. I did a lot of reading. I studied, I looked into the constitutions of the Soviet Union, particularly from the 1930s. I went back and looked at the Chinese constitutions during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 70s. I went and I read the Magna Carta. I read the rights of the French document, the rights of man. I read the U.S. Constitution again to try to get a sense of the contradictions that they were dealing with, even though that was a different system, as well as the constitutions that were actually socialist constitutions. And there is, as I point out in the book, The New Communism, there is one, essential and basic contradiction that I felt was important to speak to and to lay the basis for dealing with in a somewhat different way than it had been done in the history of socialist societies previously. And that is the contradiction that we can scientifically determine that communism, the achievement of communism, and the revolution that's necessary for that is objectively in the interest of the broad masses of people of the world, the overwhelming majority of humanity. But, and we can learn this from the experience of previous socialist societies, at any given time, not everybody in whose interest that revolution is wanted at any given time. And yet, that's one problem. And yet, at the same time, it would be absolutely criminal to make a revolution and then hand power back to the people you just overthrew and let them subject the masses of people to all the horrors that you just made a revolution to do away with. And besides that sort of obvious thing, there's also the question that, at a given point, what if a significant section of the masses has become, disoriented, has felt that the revolution is not really doing what they wanted to do and so on, and they're sort of open to being persuaded, in some subtle or even overt ways to go back to the old system. And then you have the problem, okay, it took us however many decades to actually overthrow the system. Now we're going to just let people, take us back to the old system, and we have to start all over again. No. So how do you handle this contradiction that this is in the objective interest of the masses of people, but not all of them want it at any given time? Well, you cannot handle this correctly, and it's not going to lead to a good result if you, in effect, put guns in the backs of the masses and try to force march them to communism because, quote unquote, it's in your interests. So what this Constitution is doing is providing the institutionalized means where, yes, if, say, 90% of the people wanted to go back to capitalism, they could, through the institutions of this system and its electoral processes, actually effect that. But it would take an overwhelming majority of people to do that. Meanwhile, the institutional basis provides the means for continuing on the road of socialism without having to put guns at the back of the masses, including those who become disaffected temporarily. You know, it's like a hangover. You know, masses of people get swayed. We want to go back to capitalism. And then they wake up and they say, man, I got a fucking hangover. I forgot what this fucking capitalism was like. What the fuck was I thinking of, you know? So this is a way of, like, not having that determine things. So that the way the electoral processes are set up, you know, it does serve to reinforce the existing system while allowing the masses to have a lot of sway in determining who their leader, a lot of voice in terms of who their actual leaders are. And it even allows for the possibility that people could vote to go back to capitalism if there were an overwhelming majority. But it provides the institutional means so that people don't suffer from that kind of hangover. So that, but on the other hand, you're not force marching them to communism with guns at their back. So they, you know, some of these anarchists and others say, well, you know, this is all a sham. You know, you, to use the old saying, you giveth with one hand and taketh away with the other. You know, you pretend, you let the people vote, but you stack the voting so it goes the way you want it to. Well, yes. I mean, the point is that there is no, as long as you have a society divided into different classes, into, you know, oppressive social relations that you're still striving to overcome, there's no such thing as pure democracy. You know, they always talk about free and fair elections. They called the election in Iraq when they were occupying the country with their own military a free and fair election. But even when you're don't have guns at your back, or the police aren't coming your door and dragging you out and telling you how to vote, you're being influenced by all the institutions of society and by the underlying operation of the economic system and the prevailing social relations. You're being influenced that the only reasonable thing to do is to vote to reinforce the system. That's what happens under capitalism when people go vote. You know, it even gets to ridiculous dimensions. I saw, you know, that, well, anyway, Bill Maher, I saw him on TV, and I was going to say that asshole, but, you know, he has one or 2 points, but he's mainly just really, you know, having a bad influence. And he's trying to convince people that Mike Pence is not so bad because the alternative is Donald Trump. And he goes into this whole thing about when you take an SAT test, at least when I took it, they used to ask you a question. They said, choose the best option out of this set of questions. And then he used that to say, you see, the way these reformists always talk, we can't make the perfect the enemy of the good. Therefore, we have to choose the least bad alternative. Well, Pence may be this and that. He's a Christian fundamentalist, blah, blah, but he's not trying to pull off a coup. And, you know, he's trying to use the mechanisms of the system to institute a fascist theocracy, okay? And wow, I say, Bill Maher, talk about a poverty of imagination and the lowered sights and limits of what you see as possible, that you're posing to people the choice between Donald Trump and Mike Pence. But the fact is, there's a certain logic to what Bill Maher is saying there. You got to work within the reality of the system as it is. You got to make the choices. Yeah, okay, you know, you could vote for some radical, but it's not going to get any votes. It's not going to mean anything. You're just going to take votes away from the good Democrat, or maybe from Mike Pence. But this is, you know, this is what happens under this system. There's no such thing as a free and fair election, you know, in the sense of being free of the influence of the dominant relations and institutions in the society. And yes, in this Constitution, that's also true. But at the same time, in order to avoid this whole thing of force marching to people to communism with guns at their back. It is institutionalizing the means for a tremendous amount of dissent, like I said, cultural, intellectual ferment, so that the masses can thrash out a lot of questions without losing the whole thing and then waking up the day after and say, what the fuck were we doing? Mm-hmm. Because, think of everything, all the reasons why people tell us this revolution will never happen. Are they pointing at nothing real? Of course not. They're pointing at very real things. The power of this system in terms of its armed force and its power in terms of molding people's thinking. It's very, very difficult to actually make a revolution. That's why people say to us, you'll never happen. It's too much going against it. It's too powerful. Too many people are fucked up. People are not thinking that way. The middle class is too big, and so on and so forth. Well, all that's real, and all that has to be overcome. And imagine you overcome all that, and then you encounter problems with building a new economy. You encounter problems in working out the non-oppressive relations among different sections of the people, and people become disaffected, and they forgot what it was like being under capitalism, and they want to temporarily go back, and then a week later they say, could you revolutionaries please come around again and start organizing us to get back to the other system we had, which we forgot was much better? So this is why it's institutionalized, that there are processes for people to actually choose their leaders to a very significant extent, but within a definite framework. And there are institutionalized means and provisions and encouragement of and for dissent and cultural and intellectual ferment, but within a certain framework, just as democracy is practiced within a certain framework, a very different framework within this society and this system. I would say the central problem, that is a historical problem of the communist revolution that it's speaking to and providing the institutional means to deal with, is this contradiction that this revolution and advance to communism in the world is in the fundamental interest of the masses of people, but not all the people want it all the time. But you can't solve that by force marching people to, on that road with guns at their back. So this is the institutional means for resolving that contradiction in a way that doesn't require you or force you to do that, but actually corresponds to what are the fundamental interests of the masses of people, which is why they would have risen up under your leadership to make a revolution in the first place.
When you were describing these institutional means, you're talking about the importance of, even in the new society, the importance of law, the rule of law in that society, that socialist republic in North America. And you've also done a lot of writing and thinking about the importance of the rule of law under this system, including how oppressive the law is and racist at its core, and all this stuff that the masses of people, particularly the people on the bottom of society who catch the hardest hell, just experience as a tremendous detrimental force. And one provocative statement that you've made that is really sharply posed in society today is, you write that there is or should be no such thing as victims' rights, particularly as applied to criminal proceedings. And this ties together a couple of themes that have happened, including the woke stuff itself, is in some ways interpenetrating with this victims' rights movement. And so I just think it'd be important in terms of speaking to the, we want to move, as we're moving towards a conclusion to these interviews, I'm going to be talking more about the basic people in society, at the bottom of society, I wanted to bring this out in terms of, have you speak to this question of, there should be no such thing as victims' rights, and related to the question of how important it is that there is the rule of law.
Yeah, well, let's just get right to the core of it. In simple, basic terms, victims' rights is a tool of the state of prosecution, in going after people that it's prosecuting. It's another weapon in the arsenal of the prosecution. That's the whole reason why they have victims' rights. Now, to understand that, you have to understand, what is the purpose of law? Why do we have laws? it is the basic purpose is to have a societal basis, a basis on in the society as a whole to adjudicate, that is, to resolve conflicts among the people. And, and if you go back in early history, the reason laws and the state arose and so on was that a lot of stuff in early society was carried out by just individual acts of revenge. You stole from me, so I steal from you, or, you raped my daughter, so I'm going to, kill you, etc. And this is, that just leads to chaos in society. So as societies evolved and as a state evolved and arose, then laws were a means of resolving conflicts in society through the institutions, yes, the ruling and governing institutions of society, rather than through individual conflict. That's the point of the law. So if you think about that, when someone is charged with a crime, maybe they rob somebody, the whole point is you don't have a duel between, let's have a duel between the person who was robbed and the person who robbed them, and the person who was robbed gets the first shot. That's not the way society resolves robbery. What happens? The state comes in the name of the people. This is one thing that really bugs me, I just have to say. The people of the state of California against so-and-so. Fuck you. It's not the people. It's the fucking state, okay? It's the state apparatus. It's not the people. The people don't even know what the hell's going on in this trial. And they're not the ones exercising state power and prosecuting so-and-so. So let's just get that clear. Okay, but what is happening here? The state as an institution is stepping in to this conflict, removing it from the personal realm between the person who was robbed and the person who allegedly did the robbery. We have to say allegedly because we don't know if they're guilty or not, and there's supposed to be a presumption of innocence, which is a joke, and I can tell a joke about that in a minute from real life. But they step in and they say, let's take this out of the realm of personal conflict and personal vendetta, personal revenge, and let's have it be decided on an institutional basis for the society as a whole. And that's where, that's why you have trials, and that's where the rule of law comes in. The laws aren't written to describe this dispute between these two people. They're written to describe things in general. And then those general principles of the law are applied to the particular cases. And then the prosecution comes in and makes its case, presents its evidence, and defense counters that and presents its evidence, and so on. Well, if you're going to take it out of the realm of personal conflicts, what the hell does victims' rights have to do with it? Mm-hmm. See, that's reintroducing the personal into what should be not a personal thing. You're taking people who are supposedly caused to suffer by this, not maybe the person directly, if they're alive, or their relatives or loved ones or friends or whatever. What have they got to do with this official institutionalized process? Nothing. They should have nothing to do with it. This is a question of the state taking it out of the realm of personal conflict and presenting it as a matter of law. So if you're going to do that, then you shouldn't have any, and all you're doing, first of all, the prosecution has a great advantage. It's the official institution that people have superstitious, religious life belief in. And, it has all kinds of resources that most people, especially poor people who are brought to trial, don't have. In fact, a lot of people, probably the main prosecution tactics is to pile on charges so that people who are in jail can't make bail, which is another problem. Will plead to lesser charges when, all these bogus charges were piled on to get them to plead to it. That's the main way the prosecution operates. So they don't need any additional advantage by bringing in, things that are going to prejudice the case against the defendant, which is what victims' rights represents. And I said I would tell this joke, and I have to tell this joke. It's a personal thing. It has to do with my father, who was a judge. Oh, his father was a judge. How could he be a revolutionary? Well, I would say one thing on behalf of my father, who's not around anymore. He was a liberal judge who actually believed in the rights of defendants and due process and all that. And he actually made a key decision right before the Huey Newton trial, which struck down the way that they were eliminating black jurors from juries. So he was a liberal judge, but we'd go around and, I'd tell him, well, you do good things, but you're within a certain system. So we went around on that. But he had a great story to tell as a judge. And this has to do with how bogus the presumption of innocence is, how nobody really believes it. And everybody who comes to become part of a jury pool doesn't believe it. And all the culture is against it. I mean, think of the culture. Somebody exercises their right, their constitutional right to legal assistance. Oh, you're lawyering up. Think about it. It's made a dirty thing that you're exercising your constitutional right to have a lawyer. Oh, he's lawyering up. But anyway, so my father's, they were going through voir dire in this one trial where somebody was accused of robbery, I think. And voir dire is when they question the jurors to see if they can be impartial, which, of course, is a farce, because of how they're conditioned by the whole operation of society and all the culture, the cop shows, all this bullshit that always presents the police as, beleaguered people trying, And by the way, I want somebody to show me a cop show where they don't violate the law, the cops. All right, that's a challenge. Oh, sooner or later you watch a cop show, they're going to violate the Constitution and violate people's rights in the name of something greater, stopping this terrible criminal. Anyway, so they're having voir dire in this trial, and the defense lawyer is questioning this one woman potential juror. And he said, now, you do understand the presumption of innocence, right? She said, well, I think so. He said, well, you understand it means that if my client, if you can't find that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, then you have to let him go. You have to find him not guilty. She said, yeah, I think I understand it. So you understand that if the prosecution doesn't make its case beyond a reasonable doubt, then you just have to let him get up and walk right out of this courtroom. And she said, yeah, but what if he does it again? And this speaks, my father used to love to tell that story because it shows what defense attorneys, which he used to be, are up against, and how the presumption of innocence is a non-operative joke. So, already the defendants, can't make bail, charges piled on, and so on. They're already going in at a disadvantage. And then on top of it, you bring in these people to prejudice things further by, talking about victims' rights. That should have no place in a legal system.
So, just going in this direction, in our first discussion, the first of these three interviews, we spoke of how the new communism repudiates the idea of the ends justifies the means, that a movement led with revenge, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, will just result in the reinstitution of an oppressive society if it ever gets out of one. You've also spoken to the importance of people who step into the revolution, especially those who step forward to be strategic commanders of the revolution, need to and should want to have, I think you've put it, a largeness of mind and a generosity of spirit, while also waging very sharp struggle. We've talked about this today, very sharp struggle with the masses of people to stop thinking in the ways of this system. So we were talking, I think, important to get into this generosity of spirit, broad-mindedness, and yet being very sharp with people to get out of what they've been into. And this relates to this question of, this isn't about the last shall be first or the first shall be last, but of transforming and bringing forward new people through revolution, and then especially in this new society that helps people become and realize their potential to be full human beings with that generosity of spirit.
Yeah, well, I think this question of the ends, rejecting, repudiating, and being determined to root out of the communist movement and rooting out of society more generally, what is a very poisonous notion and practice of the ends justifies the means. It goes back to your previous question, too, where people say, people will say, okay, I can, you hear this all the time. You hear it on commentators on the, bourgeois media, MSNBC, CNN, or whatever, and you hear it broadly in society. People say, okay, I can see how in the actual legal arena, when people are actually on trial, then the presumption of innocence should apply, which they don't really believe in the first place, most of them. But they'll say that, but when you're talking about conflicts that, that are not in the legal arena, then that doesn't really apply. Then you just have to go by what you think is actually, the case, and you have to believe people who claim that they were mistreated. And, this is another application of the means, justify, the ends justify the means. That, okay, and it's also faulty, logic. Because something is true, let's say, in 90% of the cases, doesn't mean it's true in every case. Let's take the question of, the sexual assault of women, which is a very big question in society and obviously a very big focal point of necessary struggle. And I've made a statement about that when the Me Too thing started up, supporting that. But there's also a negative trend that's arisen. It gets expressed as, quote unquote, believe all women, or I believe so-and-so, when you haven't really looked into it. But it's just, you're going off the fact that if you want to go by statistics, let's say a woman is accused, it's she said, he said. Well, the she is probably telling the truth an overwhelmingly majority of occasions. But that doesn't prove that it's true in any particular case. And once you throw out the principle of going by evidence, then you go on to very dangerous territory. And people in this society are very quick to make judgments without the basis for it. There's a whole, Sangfreud thing, of like, just going after people because they become a target. You want to pile on. You even want to be the Schadenfreude. That's the word I meant, not Sangfreud. Sorry, Schadenfreude thing. It's another German expression. It means you want to rip into people. So not only do people want to pile on, but they want to be the first one. I'm the first one on social media to denounce this person as soon as they're accused. And you'll see articles where people say, so-and-so is accused of this. So then you sound like, okay, it's being reasonable. They're being accused of this. And then the next thing we'll say is, and it's very important to hear from their victims. Well, now, if you're just recognizing that they're being accused, you don't know if they have victims or not. But the logic prevails that as soon as somebody's accused, they must be guilty. This prevails in the society at large. That's why the presumption of innocence is a joke. And it's being fostered now, including by all these woke types and everything. And it may seem relatively harmless because people doing this don't have state power. But, it can be used by people who do it, and is used by people who do have state power. And God forbid, if people like this ever came to have state power, would anybody want to live in a society where people apply the principle that as soon as you're accused, you're guilty? If there's not a basis for a legal procedure to determine innocence and guilt, then unless it's very obvious, unless the person accused is basically admitting that they did what they're accused of, you don't have a basis for making judgments about whether what they're accused of is true or not. And you shouldn't be leaping to make judgments like that because it's very harmful, and it sets a very harmful tone and culture in society, where people are ripping each other down. And, again, once you throw out, this is a grotesque example or expression of the ends justify the means. Because, a lot of terrible oppression goes on, therefore, who cares if we trample all over basic principles, because after all, we have to do something about the fact that people are being oppressed. Isn't that what we've always been accused of? Isn't what communists have always been accused of? Because we're for ending oppression, it's all right that we go and trample all over people's rights and just catch a whole bunch of people up in something that they may not be guilty of because it's for the greater good. And after all, most people probably are doing the things that we're accusing them of. You see how terrible this can be and is. And the whole tone it sets in society. And it's very, once again, anti-scientific. You're not going by evidence. You're not even really looking for evidence. You're just looking, once again, the Schadenfreude. You're just looking for a chance to tear somebody down because you don't think you have anything that you can do that's more meaningful than that. And this kind of stuff, we talk about the ends justify the means, is extremely poisonous and really does need to be rooted out. And that, that doesn't mean, for example, that when women come forward and say they've been sexually assaulted, they should be taken very seriously, unless the claim can quickly be shown to be without foundation. But in general, they should be taken extremely seriously. But taking them seriously means looking into it and investigating it, not automatically believing them. And you can go down the line, because once you fall into that, you're going to a very bad place. And any kind of society that would function on those principles, and it is way too much already now, would be a terrible society to live in. And, on top of everything else that we've been talking about how terrible this society is. So I just wanted to say that about your, how this links up the ends justify the means. So I'm sorry, but what was the rest of the question?
Well, I think I think it's very important, and it does permeate. It's the poison that's in that we have to actually struggle against. But there's also the concept in there of the generosity of spirit, the largeness of mind. Now I'll date myself too, because I also followed actually was opposed to the Green Bay Packers, which is an NFL football team, but there was a coach, I think it was Vince Lombardi, who said, "Nice guys finish last." Was it right? That's what. Yeah. And you once said in response to that, "Well, we have to finish first. We have to win, but we're going to do it as nice guys." And that doesn't mean we're going to be soft, as you spoke to earlier, but I thought it was important to get into what's meant by the largeness of mind, generosity of spirit, and as you said earlier, being for the emancipation of humanity, and you said in the dialogue with Cornel West, to love is not being soft.
Yeah, well, I think largeness of mind and generosity of spirit are closely connected. Largeness of mind means that you are looking at things, in a broad perspective, not narrowly, but you're actually looking at things broadly and seeking. Also you're seeking the underlying causes of things, but also you want to, learn from and encompass a lot of different things coming from a lot of different sources. That's a very important part of largeness of mind. Like we should be, the most, anxious to learn from any source that we can learn from, even people who vehemently disagree with us. If there's something that we can learn from what they're saying, even if we have to disagree with 97% of it or more, So that largest of mind means the orientation of learning from broadly from many diverse sources, including people who do not agree with you, And that's very important, because it is true that. Even, as I've said, under socialism, even reactionaries should be allowed to publish some books. I said that before the Constitution was written, which institutionalizes that. But why is that? Because you can learn. I'll give you an example from my own experience. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was an official, I think he was a defense secretary under Carter, if I'm not mistaken. And, he's a major functionary and thinker of the imperialists, wrote about the Russian Revolution, that the tradition of autocracy, and I'll explain that in a second, the tradition of autocracy in Russia seeped its way into the Bolsheviks, the communists, and that explains why they were repressive. Now, autocracy is a government that, that doesn't allow people rights, that rules by absolute authority and so on and so forth. And he said, this tradition, what was he talking about? In Russia, they had a whole tradition of absolute monarchs, the czars, whose power was unquestioned for a long time. They were the absolute and ultimate authority in society. So that was a tradition of autocracy, so to speak. And that's what Brzezinski was talking about. So he wrote this thing and he said, this applied to the Russian Revolution. This tradition, and deeply seated in Russian society, also influenced the Bolsheviks and led them to be repressive. And I wrote and I said, this is a bunch of bullshit, because the Bolshevik Revolution was against everything that the autocracy, the czars, and every oppressive and exploitative relation in society. So this is complete bullshit. So then I thought about it for a while, and I said, well, actually, it's not complete bullshit. So when you think about it, there's probably some truth to that, like Mao said about Stalin, that one of Stalin's problems methodologically was he was raised in a religious seminary where he was taught to think in the kind of absolute wooden terms that religion trains you to think. And he said this carried over into the way he led the communist movement and the socialist society. And he upheld Stalin overall, but he said this was a serious problem with Stalin. So similarly, we could say in the Russian Revolution, there was undoubtedly influence of the character of that society, even on the people who were, to use these terms, negating that society, overthrowing it and transforming and replacing it. There was still some influence there. So then, after thinking about it, I wrote something, followed up, and said, well, he has something of a point. So this is an example where you can learn, and you have to be willing to learn from people who, look, we're completely on the opposite side of everything, and when it comes down to it, we'll be on the opposite side of the barricades, so to speak, from the Brzezinskis of the world. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn anything from them, and that's why I said even reactionaries should be allowed to write books in socialist society, because they may point out some things about what we're doing that we would actually want to understand are bad, even though where they're coming from is trying to get rid of what we're seeking to do. You see what I'm saying? So that has to do with largeness of mind. Now, generosity of spirit is closely connected to that, but also involves the whole point we've been talking about. What is this revolution for? It's not for revenge. Mm-hmm. It's not just to tear down other people in order to climb over them. That's what Lenin meant when he said, everyone who makes revolution from the standpoint of they had their chance, now it's my turn to have a go, does it from the point of view of the petty bourgeoisie. And what he meant is it's characteristic of the petty bourgeoisie. They feel squeezed. They want to climb over others to get a better position. So that's not what this revolution is about. It's not about climbing over others. It's not about taking revenge. Even when people have done terrible things, it's not about taking revenge on people. If people have committed terrible crimes, and the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America institutionalizes this, there are legal means in which they should be tried and, if convicted, punished for the crimes that they've committed, including crimes against humanity and war crimes and the rest of it. But it's not a matter of individuals taking revenge. If we go down that road, it's the same problem I was just speaking to. Then you get back to the ends justify the means. Any means are justified because of what we suffered. And let's be honest. When you talk about how we got to struggle with masses of people, this is going to be one of the sharpest focus of struggle, especially with people who have been so badly fucked over under the present system, including by people who do have a little bit better position than them. I mean, this is one thing also, going way back to the woke thing. What should our focus be on, micro or macro? You see, macro means the large picture. Micro means the smallest picture. A lot of these people are focused on all the microaggressions. Okay, nobody should put up with people being racist toward them or, patriarchal toward them, misogynist. Nobody should put up with that in their personal relations. But where is your eye focused? It should be focused on the big macro, the big picture of what's going on to masses of people. That should be where your orientation and your focus is. On the thousands of people that are, the 1,000 people who are murdered every year by the police, a disproportionate number of black, brown, and Native American, many of them unarmed. The millions of people who are mass incarcerated, the people who are discriminated against, segregated, denied any kind of a decent life, forced to live in poverty or even homeless, the women who are subjected to battering and rape and all the rest of it. Those are the bigger things that our attention should be focused on in terms of uprooting all of this. And yes, with it, we'll transform these microaggressions too. But our focus has to be on the big picture. The macro means big, the big picture. So this is also very important. What was I saying before? Generosity of spirit. Okay, let's get back to that. Well, you can see how this figures in here. What is this revolution about? Why should we have generosity of spirit? Because we're emancipators of humanity. We're not about, settling scores. We're not about, ripping into people for things they've done wrong. If they've done wrong, they need to be held accountable. But we also need to struggle to transform people. That's what this revolution is about. And the generosity of spirit flows from that. If you understand that we're seeking to uproot, it both flows from it and is necessary to reinforce it. But let me put it that way. If you understand that what we're out to do is to uproot all this exploitation and oppression, then you should have a largeness of mind, including learning from everything you can learn and everyone you can learn from. but also a generosity of spirit, recognizing that people, contrary to what's often said these days, people can and do change. I can sit here and give you examples of multiple people that I know, including myself for that matter, but other people I know from the 60s and so on and since, who've undergone major transformation, major changes, people who are into really bad shit, you know, or supporting really bad things, people who were Goldwater supporters back in the 1960s who became radicals and revolutionaries through the course of the 60s, soldiers who, you know, in Vietnam have committed terrible atrocities, as I've said before. You know, go down the line. People can transform. And one of the dimensions of generosity of spirit is recognizing that. And then, okay, it's perfectly consistent with that, and in fact an expression of it, that you're going to struggle like hell with people to get them to transform, exactly because you do recognize that they can and that they need to. You're not going to be liberal. It doesn't do any good to be liberal with people. People don't need any more social workers. You know, I'm not saying all social workers do bad things, just to be clear, but that's not what communists need to be. That's not what people recognize the need for overturning this whole system, uprooting it, and bringing a different system into being. Don't need to be, you know, don't need to be just, you know, giving people some kind of solace or something, or, you know, being liberal with them. When people talk bullshit, they should be told they're talking bullshit because it's harmful. It's harmful to them, but it's harmful to much, much greater numbers of people when people are caught up in bullshit. So why should we hesitate to struggle with people? If you have respect for people, you will struggle with them. It's a lack of respect for people if you don't struggle with them when you know they're doing things that are fucked up. If you really respect people and understand the potential for them to change, you will struggle like hell with people. And we can all sit here and know that we've all been struggled with. You know, by people, you know, who at the time had a better, you know, were coming from a better place than us. You go back to anybody's history. You land, you know, you get where you are now to being an emancipator of humanity. You weren't born that way and you didn't spontaneously go that way. People fought with you. People struggled with you and you learned from them. So, you know, to me, it's the highest respect for people if you struggle. Not if you just try to tear them down. You know, not if all you're concerned is like proving that you're superior to them or that they're just worthless and irredeemable and all this kind of bullshit. But if you actually understand that they can and must change, then you have enough respect for them to struggle like hell with them, to actually act in their own interests and the interests of the broad mass of people and ultimately all humanity. So you're going to struggle like hell with them for that.
Well, you've led us right back to something we wanted to return to before wrapping up this interview, which is the tremendous potential that it's clear you see in those at the very bottom of society. Youth in particular, at the base of society, caught up catching the worst hell, the youth and others in the prisons, which you said the brother on the block or on the street, people who right now their guns are pointed at each other to way too large a degree. All of the vision of what you've described of what's possible to do with state power is not going to happen if we don't make a revolution. And yet this is a section of people who are very critical to the revolution we need. So I wanted to give you, and we wanted to give you one further opportunity to speak directly to those who are catching the worst hell and treated as the worst of the worst. What is their role in this revolution? And to those going out to them, how should we do this?
Well, I say there's both a personal dimension to this and a larger scientific dimension to it. I know that things have gone on for generations now. I mean, I know some people told us, well, you can't bring forward these youth. They might have been revolutionary once back in the day of the Black Panther Party or what, the 1960s. But there's been generation after generation caught up in this bad shit now, so there's no potential anymore. Yes, there is potential, and in one sense, it's exactly because they have been caught up in it generation after generation that there is potential. But you're not going to see it if you're just looking on the surface and what people are into. You have to go a little deeper with people. And I'll just introduce a personal dimension to this, which is very real for me. When I see, you know, and whenever I get a chance to interact, and I do sometimes with some of these youth you're talking about, I see people that I knew when I was coming up. Not that I came out of the same place they did, but people that I knew, you know, and I know what their potential was. You know, I've talked about this before. I've written about it before. You know, I had a friend, Billy, who got into the life and got killed, you know, while he's still in his 20s, caught up in a lot of bad shit, and did bad shit. But also had a whole other side to him. Had a curious mind, a sharp mind, you know, had a lot of very good, you know, sentiments toward people, ways of relating to people. And, you know, you could not have told me that somebody like that couldn't be transformed to become a revolutionary, because I knew better. And that's just a personal, and I knew other people in the same situation. I'm very fortunate to know people in this situation, you know. People who open their hearts to me the same way I did with them, you know, that's what it means to be friends. And you learn what's deeper beneath the surface of what's going on and why people are into the bad shit they're in. And, you know, how constricted, how limited and confined their lives are and their choices are, you know, in terms of how things are presented to them. And so that's like, on the basis of that personal experience, I don't care that generations I mean, I care. But it doesn't tell me, because generations have gone on, that these aren't basically the same people. They are the same people, you know, and when I interact with them, whenever I get a chance, and it's far too rare, but it's very precious, I know they're the same people. So that's on the personal level, from personal experience. But more scientifically, you can analyze, where do the actual interests of these youth lie? You know, look, I've spoken this before, look what it means when, even for a brief time, people in this situation rise above this. And I mentioned this prisoner strike in Alabama, and people are talking about how they've overcome the divisions of gangs and cliques and this kind of thing. You know, it's not going to last because of the conditions they're in, but it's very significant and precious when it happens. Or, you know, I've made this point about the truce that followed, you know, the gang truces that followed the 1992, you know, L.A. rebellion, which really wasn't just L.A. rebellion. It spread around the country. And, you know, how hard people tried to overcome generations of divisions and back and forth revenge. You know, I mean, to me, one of the most inspiring and moving things I've seen in decades was the picture after the L.A. rebellion. You know, besides, you know, blacks and Mexicans together tonight with graffiti, you know, there is a picture of a blood and a crip with their arms around each other. And that wasn't just for show. That was something real and something deep. And they really tried to overcome this, and they put forward a program, but their program was just a program that had no basis, and it was also just actually mirroring this existing system. It was a program to establish more black businesses, to enable some of these people caught up in the gangs to get into, you know, the economy by way of business and so on. And there's no economic basis for that on a broad scale. And it wouldn't lead to the liberation of people either, because, you know, a few people might get into business, but then, you know, most people can't. And plus the ones who do are going to be employing other people and exploiting them, whether they mean to or not. You know, but still, look how hard people tried. And there was a prisoner, you know, strike in California a number of years ago, the same kind of thing. Yeah, the gangs are still in there, and yeah, there's bad shit, but they rose up and overcame that for a short period of time. And that shows the potential, and it also shows that there's something deeper in people than what they're doing every day and what they're caught up in. That they you know, reach for something better, something higher. They want something different, you know. And if you get people away from what they're caught up in, and talk to them heart to heart, they will tell you, in many cases, most people want something different, even if they're caught up in this and they don't know how to get out of it. And that's where we come in, the revolutionaries, the people who have come to understand that there's a whole different way. we have to go to these youth and others. Yes, we need to go to the educated youth. You're not going to make a revolution without people from the educated youth. That's very important for the revolution, including critical and creatively thinking people who have a capacity to, work and grapple with complicated ideas. We need that. But your question is very much to the point about, these more, youth down on the street, the hardcore youth, there is burning within them because nobody wants to live the way these youth are being forced to live. You could take maybe a few, really into it, and that this is really their thing, but nobody, if you're talking about, I shouldn't say nobody, but overwhelmingly, people don't want to live the way people we're talking about are forced to live. But this system, we could go into why and how. It deindustrialized a lot, all these areas that people live in, like the south side of Chicago. Used to be these factories, a gigantic steel plant, U.S. Steel, that people used to work at. Gary, Indiana, which is now a ghost town, had the biggest steel plant in the entire world, I think, going back a few decades. And a lot of black people worked there. Those places are closed down. These youth coming up, they have no future. And that's because of the workings of this system. And there is a burning down there. It may be simmering. It may be just a flickering flame, but there is a burning for something better. And it is up to us to provide the vehicle and the means for all these masses of people in this situation, including these youth, to become part of fighting for something better. And yes, it goes back to the previous thing. We're not going to do it without a lot of struggle. You got to break through the surface. You got to break through the bullshit. You got to break through even the hardcore shit to get down to where people really live and feel. And then you got to struggle with them about what your life should really be all about. What is really worth dedicating and if necessary, even giving your life to? Not that we take that lightly. We certainly don't. We understand that, as Mao said, of all things in the world, people are most precious. And people's lives are precious to us. But even if you have to give your life, give it for something worthwhile, something that's going to mean something for you and people like you all over the world and for the little ones. And don't tell me you don't love the little ones. I see you out there pushing the little ones around. I see the pride that you have in the little ones. So don't tell me you don't care, because I know different and I know better. And there is a way, but we got to give people the way. And that means a tremendous amount of struggle. It's not just handing them away and they're going to take it. It's a tremendous amount of struggle. And we have to also, especially in this rare time when revolution becomes more possible, we have to get right down on the ground with them and explain in terms they can understand, and then get in more into the complexities as we go along. But get to the basic thing that there is a way out of all this. And right now we have more opportunity than we've had in your lifetime or my lifetime to do this. And we can't afford to be wasting this time and this opportunity in bullshit. We got to get with this revolution so we can get all this shit off of our backs and make a future for the next little kids you're pushing along that's worth living for, so they don't have to go through what you are going through now, which isn't what you wanted to go through, but it's what the system has put you in the place of to have to go through. We have to go and present this to them in a living way. There is a way out of this. It's not an easy way. It's not a guaranteed way, but it's a real way. It's a real possibility, especially in this time when we're talking about where the conditions are more favorable for revolution, even as they're tending right now towards something terrible. With the ruling class divided and fighting each other, with society being ripped apart, with the potential for this to rip apart all the dominant institutions in society. One of these youth said, well, if I get with your revolution, my chances of being taken out are just about 100%. But if I do what I'm doing, going up against people like me, maybe my chances are 50-50. Well, that's just wrong, like I've said before. It's wrong in terms of what your life should be about, and it's wrong in terms of, the possibilities for revolution. Because we have a real strategy, and we have a real, method. to grapple with the problems that lie on the road to revolution and actually break through and gather more and more forces to where a revolutionary struggle for power could actually have a chance to win. And you can't ask for more than that. You can't ask for more than a chance to win to get this whole fucking thing off your back. And this is what we're aiming for, and this is what we got to take to people and explain to them and struggle like hell with them about what speaks to their deeper feelings and hopes and aspirations, not just the shit they're caught up in on the surface. So I say, both from personal experience, which is limited, I know, but it tells me something, but also by scientific analysis and by learning from all different kinds of sources and getting every bit of knowledge I can, that there is a potential there. And we have to go and make that potential become a reality and struggle with people to become emancipators of humanity. And we start winning some, it's going to provide the basis to win more. And it's going to become a pole of attraction. And what people would really like to jump to will start getting expressed when they see a growing force out there that's real. And so this is my answer. We got to, we have what these youth and the mass of people need, but it includes a lot of struggle with them, and we have to go and take that to them and wage that struggle, because this is for ending all the shit that they're being forced to go through, and all the shit that humanity is being put through and that they're threatened with now, with the destruction of the environment and this danger of nuclear war among these imperialists. We have to go to the people and give them the means to do what deep down they would love to do if they could understand scientifically that there's a basis for it. So that's what I would say.
Well, I just have to say that I think it's been so important, meaningful, that the audience of this show, which is small, but it needs to grow, but it's not nothing. There's people who are watching this show, and we spread it, have had a chance to not just hear what you just put forward and the combination there of the determination to make revolution and be rid of all this, combined with that generosity of spirit, largeness of mind, and purpose of emancipating humanity. This is very powerful, and especially that they've come to know you, especially in a moment as we're sitting on the precipice of the potential of making a revolution, and when you, as well as Sansarba, you've been under attack, for people to get a chance to know you more deeply. Somewhat tempted to let that last answer that you gave stand for the end of the show, but I'm going to, the risk of being a little repetitive, I'm going to ask you to repeat the whole thing. No. No, I'm not going to do that. But, you've been doing this for a long time. You've been leading the revolution. You've been a leader before that. And I think people would want to know a bit more about, even as it's been contained in what you said, what sustains you? What makes you not only not give up, but continue to strive and develop the science and to struggle with the masses of people, to struggle with all of us who are following you, and just stating a willingness to struggle with all these masses to get into the one way out for them, and then also maybe say something, even as you've just covered a lot of it, to those people who are in this movement and those people who don't even know about it yet but need to be in this movement, of where are they going to get that inspiration, that courage, that conviction, that sustenance to really put it all on the line, as you just said, to really live and if necessary, make whatever sacrifice is required to bring about a world where humanity could really flourish?
Well, I mean, as the first part, the most fundamental thing in terms of anyone being sustained is having a scientific approach to reality, being grounded in that and consistently applying a scientific method and approach to understand the contradictions that you're up against, to understand the deeper driving forces of things, to understand that everything we've been talking about, all the horrors, are rooted in this system, and that there is a way to eliminate all this by uprooting and overthrowing this system and replacing it with something much better. So in most, the most important thing and the most basic thing is having that scientific method and approach, but it's not something you get once. You have to keep on struggling to apply it in a living way to a constantly changing reality, and to deepening your understanding of that scientific method, including learning from your mistakes, the things you did wrong, but also learning from what, the things you did right and what results that produced, and then building on that. So that's the most fundamental thing. As far as, more personal thing, I think it's the same as everybody else who's part of this. You come to see that this world is, first of all, intolerable, and second of all, that it's unnecessary. And once you see those two things, then you can't, not apply yourself to actually bringing about the change that's needed, the fundamental revolutionary change that's needed. It's just, it's again, the science keeps you grounded, keeps you going through all the difficulties and contradictions. But there's a basic stand that what the people in the world are being put through is completely intolerable and completely unnecessary. I mean, I could talk about some of my own personal development in this, but as I've said before, I consider myself extremely fortunate. I grew up in a city which, on the one hand, was a, intellectual center. I grew up in a middle-class family. I lived in the Berkeley Hills, where all the better-off people live. And because of that, I was able to be exposed to a lot of, knowledge, but not just knowledge. A lot of intellectual curiosity was encouraged. And I was able to, have a lot of resources to read books, and I used to go to Shakespeare plays, and I went to plays by Leroy Jones too, and he was called Leroy Jones. Mm-hmm. But I had, was very encouraged and was interested in a broad array of cultural and intellectual things. And I had the situation where I could do that because of how I grew up. But then, my life changed dramatically. I mean, for one thing, I'll give my parents credit, partly because my mom was very religious. My dad was religious. My mom was very religious. They sent me to YMCA camp from the time I was 9 years old. And the one thing really good about that, or the one thing that really stands out, is that the YMCA in Berkeley, which is the one sponsoring the camp, was integrated. You go to the Y was integrated. You go to the camp that I went to for 5 years, it was integrated. And not just were there, for example, black people at the camp, but the cabins that you slept in, the group you were part of was integrated. So, I still remember, I won't say his full name, I remember one dude, Wesley, was in a cabin with me and his cousin, for the years I went there. And, to be honest, when I was a kid, I was kind of spoiled too, coming up, and they didn't like me that much, but I had some interactions with them that made an impression on me, like one time I got really homesick at camp, and I knew that some of these kids didn't like me very much, and so I kind of, when I think I was 9 or 10, I went and I threw myself down in my bunk in the cabin, and either Wesley or his cousin came in and started comforting me. And saying, you're not that bad, you shouldn't feel that bad. People don't hate you that much, and it made me feel better. And it made a deep impression on me, and so did the whole thing of going to camp. But, and then I went to middle school or junior high school, as it was called, and, there were very few black people there, but in 9th grade, my best friend, John, was black, and we got pretty close. We did some singing stuff together and had a lot of fun together, and that had an impression on me. And then I consider, like, one of the great things about Berkeley was that it only has one public high school. And so when you go to that public high school, you're thrown together with everybody. Like, there was 3 junior highs when I went there. They're not there now in the same way. But it was Garfield, where I went to, which was overwhelmingly white, some Latinos, and about 25 black people. Then there was Willard and Burbank, where most of the Latinos and, large numbers of black people went, especially Burbank, which was in southwest Berkeley. And we all came together. At that time, the high school was like three years, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. We all came together. And I still remember my first day of high school. They had an orientation. And, if you came from Garfield, there was all this racist shit. And like, oh, man, you're going to go down to Berkeley High, and there are going to be all these black kids there from Burbank and Willard, and you're going to get your ass kicked and all this kind of stuff. And so, they had an assembly the first day for all the new students. And so I got there late. And I was looking for a seat, and I couldn't find. I mentioned this in my memoir, but I was looking for a seat, and I couldn't find a seat. And I'm walking all around looking for a seat, and then I went by this one guy who was kind of slouched against the wall like this, and his feet were sticking out. And I said, I don't want to get into any shit here, so I walked very gingerly around him. And as I did, he turned to me and said, "Hey, man, you stepped on my dogs." I didn't step on his feet at all, just to be clear. I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did, man. You stepped on my dogs." And then that was all there was to it. Now, this dude, whose name was Odell, he and I became friends later on. We were in a singing group together when I was a senior in high school. I used to see him out in the hallway, because he didn't go to class all that much. But, he was creative. So I'd see him out in the hallway when I was going to class, and I'd say, "Hey, Odell, what are you doing, man? How come you're not in class?" He'd say, "I'm writing songs." So, then he'd be writing songs for our group, I remember he had one that was called "Chuck is Good for You." It was all about, eating good food was good for you. But so, that was Odell, and you go through changes. At first, it's like, "You stepped on my dogs." And then we're in a singing group together, and they're telling me, "Hey, man, step back here a little bit. We don't want your white ass sticking out too much when we're doing our routines." So this is all part of the the really great experience you have. I had many experiences like this. I made a lot of friends. I didn't make friends to make a point. I made friends because I liked people. Some of them were white, some of them were Japanese, some of them were Latino, a number of them were black. But they were people I liked. I got to know them in sports. I got to know them in singing class and this kind of thing. They became my friends. You know what? Friends are people in your heart, okay? Mm-hmm. I don't mean something superficial. Oh, I got a bunch of black friends. I mean, these are people that are in your heart, okay? These people that, you go to their house and they come to your house and you talk all kinds of shit with each other about what's going on, and you talk on the phone back in those days. And I don't know what the fuck we talked about, but we talk about it for hours. So these are people in your heart. And then you see what people are being put through. Just, the daily shit and the bigger shit. And, my mom always taught me, as a good Christian, that you should care about other people. That's the kind of Christianity she was about. You should care about other people. So, I cared about my friends, not just because my mom told me to, although that had an influence on me, but I cared about my friends because they were here. These are my friends, and you're doing all this shit. Plus, I loved the culture they were part of. I loved being in a singing group. I mean, I could get into old stories about that. It was a lot of fun. I can remember, I guess I am going to tell a story. I remember one time we went to Live Oak Park, which is the main park one of the main parks in Berkeley, and I could tell more stories about that, but we don't have time for that. And our group was going to do a sing for a dance there. And we're walking, past the basketball courts, getting ready to go into the auditorium to do the singing. And and our lead singer was my friend Sam. And a friend of his was playing basketball, and he's coming over to get a drink of water. And he says, "Sam, what the fuck are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I'm here to sing with my group." "You can't sing, Sam." "Yeah, I can, man." So then they had to do a Spaniel song. They had to have a sing-off. Guy challenged Sam to sing. So they did a verse and a half, and the other guy gave up because Sam could really sing. So, this was all, I love this. This was all part of, something that, just, made my life rich. And then you're going to tell me that you're going to do this and that to my friends. And then you're going to do this and that to all these other people that are just like my friends. I mean, Sam took me out to his house. We went out to East Oakland. He lived right at the edge of East Oakland, right by 98th Avenue, I think it is. And in those days, San Leandro was right next to East Oakland, and you didn't go in San Leandro if you were black back in those days. And there was a creek and a fence right by where Sam lived, and that was the dividing line. You know, you didn't go into San Leandro. Here's my friend Sam. He couldn't go into San Leandro. It was right across the creek because he'd get jumped on. So I'm saying, what kind of fucking world is this? So that was a big thing to me, you know. And then, you know, the civil rights movement was jumping off, and then, you know, more militant and revolutionary forces like the Black Panther Party came forward, and I was in college at that time. You know, I had recovered from a serious illness, and I had an ambition. I wanted to learn a whole bunch of languages. I wanted to be a Renaissance man, you know, be able to speak at least 5 or 6 languages and read literature in all these different languages, you know, and I was taking all kinds of literature courses, and I had a favorite professor who was Italian, you know, and all this kind of stuff. I was enjoying my time, but I also was still thinking about all these big things going on. And then the Black Panther Party came along. You know, and I was devastated by the death of Malcolm X, like a lot of people were, millions and millions of people, and more than that around the world. And the Black Panther Party came along, and, you know, well, I could go back, you know, just since you asked me this question, I'm going to get into it. You know, so I mentioned my friend Billy, you know, so about when I was still in college, but just, you know, maybe about 1965 or something, I was down at this rec center in Southwest Berkeley. It used to be called the Grove Rec Center, but it's not called Grove anymore. But I was down there, and my friend Billy was playing basketball. He was a great basketball player. And then, you know, after they finished up, he introduced me to this dude named Weasel, whose nickname was Weasel. And they'd played against each other in high school. You know, Weasel went to McClymonds High School in West Oakland, and Billy went to Berkeley High, and they played a great game. But unfortunately, McClymonds won, and our high school that Billy played for lost by 1 point in overtime. And it was a bitter thing, but they were friends, Billy and Weasel. So Billy and I talked a while, and then he introduced me to Weasel, and Weasel and I started talking. And, you know, Weasel was interested, as I was, in all this shit going on. So, you know, we kept on talking, and then he asked me to give him a ride home. So I gave him a ride home. We went over to his house, and we stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning drinking coffee and talking with his mom, as well as him, of course. You know, the three of us talking about what was going on with black people in America and all the shit this imperialist ruling class was doing in Vietnam and the Congo and all this kind of stuff. I still remember that very vividly, this staying up till 2 in the morning. And then I hung out with Weasel for a while. And then one day he said to me, you know, there's going to be this cultural program going on at the community college in Oakland. I think it's called Merit now. And so I said, you know, he said, why don't you come on down there? It's an Afro-American cultural program. So I went down there, and, you know, I was, I think, one of 2 white people in the audience, but that was fine. And Bobby Seale turned out to be the MC. And he was hilarious. I mean, he could do great impressions of all kinds of people. He did an impression of Bill Cosby back in the day. He was down on Bill Cosby for doing I Spy, being a CIA agent. And he was mocking Bill Cosby, imitated John Kennedy, all this kind of shit. And I thought, you know, he was great, you know, as an MC of this program. And so then the program ended, and I'm starting to leave. And this guy comes up to me, and he says, who are you, Socrates? And I said, no. And then it turned out it was Huey Newton. And then we started having a discussion about what's going on with black people, black liberation, revolution. And he said to me, you know, are you part of the CP? Because he was trying to figure out why I was there. First, he wanted to know if I was Socrates. Then he wanted to know if I was in the CP. Are you in the Communist Party? And I said, no. He said, that's good. They're not revolutionary. Are you in Progressive Labor Party? I said, no. He said, that's good. They pretend to be revolutionary, but they're not revolutionary either. And then we got into a discussion, and he was running down about how revolution could succeed, especially for black people in America, because although they might be a minority in America, at least 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the world was with them. So it's possible they could make revolution here. And that was, you know, somewhat naive. It wasn't a fully developed scientific approach. But it made an impression on me, and this whole discussion made an impression on me. And then I was working at Ramparts magazine, and Eldridge Cleaver got out of prison on the basis of getting a job at Ramparts. So we were talking all the time, and I used to go over to his house, and as I mentioned, I talked to him on the phone sometime. And, and this just got me, much deeper into understanding that we needed a revolution. And I just bring it to a close by saying none of the things that I've mentioned that propelled me in this direction have gotten better. It's not that, there's more black middle class, there's more women able to do this and that, but these terrible forms of oppression, not just to people, the whole Vietnam War thing, all the atrocities that you learned about. I took that war very seriously. I took time to make up my mind. When I was in the free speech movement, we had a sit-in in the administration building for a couple of days and finally won our demands. But all the leaders of it, or almost all of them, were against the Vietnam War. And I remember Mario Savio, the main leader, got up and talked about what the administration was doing against us was the same type of thing that our government was doing in Vietnam. And I kind of didn't like that because I wasn't sure, how I felt about Vietnam. But I was studying. I was going into the library and I was reading up on all the different, things that were being analyses about Vietnam, and I was reading about the commission that was set up to oversee the situation in Vietnam, International Commission, and they were reporting that it was the U.S. side that was violating all the agreements. These kind of things are going around in my mind, and I'm thinking and studying and everything. And then, as I've said a number of times, I woke up in the spring of 1965. Got the newspaper, and here's this great big article about Selma, Alabama, and the Pettus Bridge and the attack on the civil rights marchers, and that was it for me. I said, how in the fuck can these people, this government that claims it's bringing freedom to the people of Vietnam and getting rid of these terrible communist tyrants, how in the fuck can they be bringing freedom to the people in Vietnam? Why would they even be trying to do that when look what they're doing in this country and look what the government is allowing to go on right here? And that was it for me. So, all these things came together, but none of this has gotten better. If anything, it's gotten worse. The environment, the whole thing of the environment was just starting, the environmental danger and crisis was just beginning to be recognized at that time. Some people saw where things were headed. But it's gotten obviously worse over decades, and it's accelerating all the time. And, the danger of nuclear war, all these things have not gotten better. And, the people that I care about, that I've learned about, not just the people I grew up with, but the people around the world that I've learned to care about, when I've learned about their situation, to me, for me to give up would be betraying all those people. It'd be like turning your back on your best friends. So it's fundamentally the science that's the foundation, and that you need to keep deepening and applying and grasping and learning, or else you will go off course. But there's also a thing, but I think everybody who gets into this revolution feels that right here you feel like what people are being put through, you just can't go along with it. You just can't stand by and watch it happen. You can't live with yourself if you don't do everything you can, especially when you know it's unnecessary and a better world actually is possible. You can't give up. Yes, you can get discouraged. When there's defeats, when there's setbacks, big ones, gigantic ones, like when China went off the socialist road, was taken off the socialist road, and the revolution was betrayed there, and capitalism was restored, and it's emerged as an imperialist power instead of a revolutionary stronghold for the people of the world. Those things are discouraging, but you bear down with the science, and you keep in your heart why you got into this in the first place, and what it is you're in this for. And that's why I don't give up. So that's what I would say about that.
I just want to say this has been an extraordinary experience and journey that we've been on together over the course of these 3 interviews. And I want to say on behalf of myself, and I know many people watching and many people in a lot of different places, whether they know it or not yet, of what you've done. I want to say thank you for your big heart. I want to say thank you for staying on the revolutionary road and never giving up over many years when many other people did the opposite. I want to thank you for applying your science and all of your critical faculties to charting and solving the biggest problems of the revolution. And I want to thank you for taking the time to come and talk with us and share this with our audience here on the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. We are determined to make this be a big rocket booster in advancing this revolution and lifting this beast of U.S. imperialism off the face of and the backs of the people of the world. So thank you.
I'm very excited to do it. And the main thing is for everybody who's watching and for everybody that they can reach to get with this revolution. We got a chance here that we don't get very often. It's we're working for revolution all the time, but this is a time when we got more of a chance than we usually have, and it's a rare opportunity we almost never get when revolution becomes more possible. So what I would say is, and the reason I am here and the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is that more people need to get with this revolution, and let's make it real. Let's really go out and fight with masses of people in a good way, with our arms around them, to become part of this revolution, and let's really go for the whole thing because of everything it means for people in the world as a whole.
Well, we'll do our part, and you've done your part by being on this show and everything you've written, and there wouldn't be a show like this without the work you've done. So I want to thank you once again for being on the show, everything Sansara said, and you're welcome to come back anytime you want, brother.
Absolutely.